We begin with a dramatic expansion of presidential power by the Supreme Court. The High Court has expanded the president's ability to fire heads of independent agencies, but not the Federal Reserve. Let's bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson. Jessica, good to see you again today. Can you take us through these split rulings and their significance?
Absolutely. So we have a ruling on the one hand dealing with the FTC, the Trade Commission. And in that case, what the court says is that when Congress creates these executive agencies, they can't put for-cause limitations on a president's ability to fire the heads of those agencies. Why? Because when it comes to the FTC or the NLRB or the FEC or any of these so-called alphabet agencies, they all fall under the executive branch. And so the executive needs to be the one to be able to say, you're fired, whether or not that's for cause. And of course, we should emphasize this is not a decision that says, President Trump, you get the power. It's a decision that says any president, you get the power to do this. And this is pretty consistent with what the court has been saying for years when it comes to the head of these agencies. Now let's turn to the other decision. And this decision deals with the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, of course, sets monetary policy. It does something different than what many of those executive agencies does. And in this case, I think the Trump administration acknowledging that the Fed is different and knowing where the Supreme Court is on this did not challenge the forward cost standard. Instead, what was challenged is whether or not the Trump administration was able to fire Lisa Cook, one of the members of the board of the Fed, essentially whether or not the allegations that they waged against her amounted to for cause. And the court said in that case, we think Trump administration, you're unlikely to succeed. So it does show, Mugo, that difference between how the court is treating, the FTC, the NLRB, other agencies that are similarly situated versus the Fed.
So, Jessica, the High Court also ruled on if states can count mail-in ballots after Election Day. This is very important with the midterms just around the corner. What did we learn from that ruling?
So this was a ruling based on a federal law that says that Election Day is the Tuesday after the first Monday in November, and the state laws, as you said, that allow for a so-called grace period. A grace period means your ballot is postmarked by Election Day, but it's not received for a certain period of time after that. Now, is it okay for states to do that, or does that conflict with federal law? What the court said today is that's okay. Those two things can live together. We should remember that if Congress doesn't like this, this entire decision is based on a statutory interpretation, not what the Constitution requires. So Congress can create a new standard and pass a law that says states, you don't get to create these grace periods. Right now, what the Supreme Court does is essentially lock in the status quo. States like California, states, in this case, the case came out of Mississippi, they can create these grace periods. That's okay right now.
And for anyone who's been keeping track, Jessica, there's still some very huge cases that the Supreme Court has not ruled on. Can you take us through them and when we might get those rulings?
So we actually know when we're going to get those rulings. The rulings will come tomorrow, the last day of the term. That often happens as you and I get to talk about the Supreme Court. We often say, and we'll expect a decision by the end of June. We're expecting decisions by the end of June. Birthright citizenship, birthright citizenship, birthright citizenship. Obviously, that's what many people are waiting for. Also, the trans athlete cases, we're going to get those. And in addition, there's another election law case that deals with campaign finance as well.
Okay. Jessica Levinson, I'm sure we'll probably talk to you tomorrow as well. Thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate it. And now let's bring in CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang at the White House for us today. Weijia, good to see you. What is the president's reaction to the court's rulings today?
Well, Mugo, the president has been very active on social media, posting his reactions to all of this morning's rulings from the Supreme Court. So let's start with the one about Lisa Cook that Jessica just laid out for us. He is claiming that the administration only lost on this one due to a procedural basis. So this is the one that involves the Federal Reserve Board. Of course, the president tried to fire Cook, and he says that it's just because he didn't go through the right processes, because the justices did write that, the protections were not thoroughly investigated for Cook's firing, and that because of that, her firing should be void from the beginning. But it's also really notable, Mugo, that as Jessica laid out, the justices also made a point to make a distinction between the Federal Reserve and other independent agencies, in part because of its large role in the nation's financial system. Now, when it comes to the FTC and that firing of Slaughter, the president did take a victory lap. He said to show the importance of the Slaughter case, 90 years of precedent has been completely and unequivocally overruled, greatly increasing presidential power at a time when it is most needed. So that was clearly a win for the president and sets the precedent for other agencies that are not the Federal Reserve Board. As for voting rights, the president acknowledged that this was a loss for him, and so he is using it to make a case for the Save America Act, which he has been really trying to push Congress to pass. He says all voters must show photo ID, all voters must show proof of citizenship, and no mail-in ballots except for illness, disability, military deployment, or travel, because anyone against those three things would only oppose them if they want to cheat. So again, he's using this loss at the nation's highest court to push lawmakers to try to do it legislatively. But Republicans have already said, Mugo, that they don't have the votes to do that.
And Weijia, what about the war with Iran? There was a pause in hostilities right now after a weekend of strikes. But does this mean talks between the two sides are now back on?
According to the White House press secretary, they are. In fact, she said that this week the president's top negotiators, Steve Witkoff and his son-in-law Jared Kushner, would be flying to Doha after Iran requested meetings. On top of that, the technical talks to work out the details of the memorandum of understanding will also take place. So even though there were hostilities, there was a trade in fire over the weekend, as you pointed out, it seems that negotiations are ongoing. But of course, we'll be closely watching to see at what point do these military operations, even though they might be smaller than what the administration would call an all-out war, at what point would they consider a ceasefire to be broken? As of today, the U.S. says that the ceasefire is still in place despite those strikes. So this is obviously a very volatile, very vulnerable situation that we'll continue to monitor.
Okay, I know you will. Weijia Jiang at the White House for us today. Thank you so much.